They say war tests loyalty, but no one tells you which part of yourself it will break. That morning, the river burned like a wound across the earth. I could hear him calling my name from beyond the smoke. The wind carried the fire along the water as if it were a ribbon soaked in oil. Flames traced the current in jagged lines, flaring and falling, licking at driftwood and broken beams that had once been a bridge. The smell of pitch and wet timber mixed with something bitter that turned the back of my throat to chalk. I crouched behind a low wall of shattered stones and tried to keep my breathing small. Every breath felt like it had shape and weight, as if the river could hear it and drag me in. Behind me, someone shouted the retreat again. The words came clipped and certain, the way officers say them when they have decided that what is left to save is not the living, but the map. Boots moved past me in a staccato rhythm, gravel and glass grinding underfoot. Men with soot on their faces and eyes like spent matches carried field packs and cradled rifles that had turned into simple sticks, useful mostly for balance on the broken ground. I could not make my legs join them. My feet were planted as if the stones had grown up around my boots and set hard. Across the river, through a breathing veil of smoke, a figure moved and then dropped out of sight. I knew the weight of that silhouette. I knew the slant of that shoulder when a man is trying to drag himself with one good arm. I knew it the way a hand knows the missing finger. I could not see his face, but I could hear him as if the air itself were a field telephone connected only to my ear. My name came in short bursts that sounded like coughs. Each time I told myself I had imagined it. Each time the next call broke that promise. The sky held a pale and pitiless light. It made the black smoke look heavier. It made every broken thing shine with the same color as bone. There had been a bridge only hours earlier. We had crossed it at first light, one by one. Water dark and sullen under us, the planks singing that thin little song they make when boots tap them. Then the enemy found the range. Shells fell like iron weather. When the orders came to pull back and blow the crossing, the sappers moved with a calm that made me believe in miracles. The blast rose, a flower of wood and flame, and then the petals fell and the river began to burn. I tried to tell myself that the figure across the water could not be him. The mind makes mercy with lies when facts would kill you. But a coat sleeve caught the light and I saw the patch we had sewn on months before with poor thread on a crate lid. My fingers remembered the needle. No one else in the company wore it that way. That was the end of doubt. Doubt had been kind to me, but it had run out of things to give. A mortar cracked somewhere to my right. I could not see the arc. The report was a clean slap, and then the ground nearby spat grit into my gums. I swallowed and tasted metal. A runner slid beside me and slapped my shoulder. His voice was a rasp that had been taught to sound like authority. "Fall back," he said. "That is an order. The far bank is lost." I nodded, because nodding cost nothing, and I kept my eyes on the smoke. The runner looked at me for 1 second longer than he needed to, as if measuring whether I belonged to the list of the living or the ledger of problems. Then he moved on, shouting the same words again. The air was a drawer full of paper that someone had yanked open too fast. Every page wanted to fly, and none of them made sense. The current took a whole tree under. It turned once like a creature trying to breathe, and then the fire found the sap, and it went up in a bloom. Ash fell in a lazy snow that stuck to the sweat at my hairline. I thought about water and thirst at the same time, and felt foolish for both. Somewhere behind me a man was laughing, too loud, the way men laugh when they have done the math and do not like the answer. My friend's voice came again, faint and fierce, a thread knotted through the cloth of noise. He was not calling to the unit. He was not calling to the officers or the sky. He was calling to me. A part of me wanted to turn and point to my chest and say that I had heard, that I had not forgotten, that I would answer in a way that meant something. Another part of me tried to lift my boot, to step into the line of men who were still alive because they knew when to leave. When I forced the heel up, the toes remained. The ground refused to let me settle for half a decision. He had been with me in forests where branches scratched like the nails of a jealous god. He had been with me in alleys where the air smelled like cabbage and fear. He had slept on my shoulder when the cattle cars rocked and groaned. I thought of small things, the way a man will. The way he tapped a tune with 2 fingers when he had nothing to say. The way he lifted his chin when he lied and tried not to. The way he cut his bread as if rescuing it from the knife. The river popped and hissed. I pressed my palm to the stone and felt grit bite into the skin. It grounded me in a world made of touch and temperature. 2 more men ran past and one of them stumbled. The other grabbed him by the belt and pulled him along without looking back. That small act should have been enough to teach me, but it only made my heart hurt. I could not tell whether it hurt because I admired them or because I envied how simple it looked when 2 men moved in the same direction. Shots came from the trees beyond the far bank, single and hunting. You learn the language of bullets if you live long enough with them. These had the flat impatience of rifles fired by men who could see shapes but not faces. They were not shooting at me in particular. I did not know whether that was mercy or oversight. I pulled my helmet down until the strap pinched the tender spot behind my ear. Small pain is easy, it is honest, it can be held. I needed a plan, or at least the first inch of one. The water between the flames looked black and swift. There were gaps where the fire thinned and the current showed its back, slick and treacherous. Debris moved like dark fish. The remains of the bridge made a crooked spine not far from where I crouched. Some of the supports still jutted up, charred and steaming. Planks bobbed and drifted in broken rafts. Fire ran along them and then died, and then flared again when some fresh thread of oil reached them from upriver. If I crossed, it would have to be there. If I stayed, I would have to learn a new way to breathe without air. The order to retreat did not argue. Orders do not argue. They do not explain. They do not tell you they are trying to keep enough of you alive to make another line on another map. They just arrive and sit in your mouth like a coin you cannot swallow. Someone knelt at my shoulder. It was Carol, face streaked, eyes bright on the edge of breaking. He looked at the river and then at me and did not ask. He had already seen the answer in my posture, the way a man reads weather in the back of his hand. "You cannot," he said. "It will not matter. He is gone." "He is not gone," I said. I did not raise my voice. I could not afford to wake any more of the world than was already awake. Carol closed his eyes for a heartbeat, and when he opened them, he had become older by a year. "Do not make me watch," he said. I touched his sleeve. The fabric was damp and rough. He flinched as if I had passed a current into him. I meant the touch as a kind of prayer. I meant it as a promise to return. I meant it as a way to carry some part of him with me so that no matter what the river took, I would not cross alone. He stood. He looked at me as if counting. Then he did the only kindness left to us. He turned and walked away before I broke the rules in front of him. A shell burst far off, only a bruised thump. The sound came late, shaped by distance and fog. I waited for the follow-on, and it did not come. The rhythm of the battle was shifting to that strange pause that feels like mercy and is only exhaustion. The smoke thinned, and for a second I saw the far bank more clearly. I saw my friend on his side, head lifted, lips moving without voice. I saw his hand scrabble and fail. That small motion was a flag planted in my chest. I slung my rifle across my back and loosened the strap to keep it from catching when I went into the water. The metal kissed my shoulder through the cloth. I shrugged until it lay flat and obedient. I took off my gloves and tucked them into my belt. My fingers felt both cold and burned. I pulled my jacket tighter, then opened it again so I could move my arms when the current took me. Every action felt ceremonial, as if each buckle and strap were a step in a ritual I had known since childhood. Somewhere a priest would have nodded. Somewhere a mother would have closed a window so she did not have to hear. One more order rang out from behind me, louder, closer, furious without a target. I let the words pass through me like wind through ruined eaves. I set my eyes on the crooked spine of the bridge, on the places where the fire leapt, and then leaned back as the wind changed. I measured the distance the way a man measures an apology, knowing it would never be enough, hoping it would be something. I slid from behind the stones and felt the open day find me, my body braced, as if the sky were a weight. The ground to the riverbank was a spill of cinders and sand that gave way under my soles. I walked anyway. My heart beat with a steady, workmanlike insistence. It did not hurry me, and it did not slow me. It only asked the same question with every thud. When I reached the edge, heat climbed into my face and eyes. The fire talked in 1,000 small voices. The water answered in one long hiss. I stepped down onto the first wet plank that still held, and it bowed under me. I felt the river's pull take my calves like a hand that had waited patiently for its moment. I looked once across the burning channel and found him one more time, his head lifted. Even at that distance, I knew the shape of his effort and the hope in it. We were 2 points on a line that no map had room to draw. I went forward. The first step took my balance. The river's current wasn't just strong, it was alive, dragging at my legs like it had been waiting to claim what the fire had spared. The heat wrapped around me, tightening with every breath. Smoke filled my mouth and crawled down my throat, turning each inhale into a blade. The second step sank deeper. The plank beneath me groaned and tilted, breaking loose. I plunged knee-deep into the black water and gasped as the cold struck through the fire's warmth. The shock cleared my head for one brief second. I grabbed a beam jutting out from the broken frame of the bridge and pulled myself forward. The sound of gunfire faded into a dull throb, as if the world had closed its ears. Each motion was a negotiation between survival and surrender. The water wanted both. Flames floated past on oil slicks, their reflections trembling across my sleeves. My fingers were numb, my skin seared, yet somehow both sensations lived in me at once. I couldn't tell if the shaking in my arms was fear or exhaustion. Through the smoke, I could still make out the outline of his body, a motionless shape near the reeds on the far bank. I tried to call his name, but my voice broke apart in the heat. The sound came out dry and hoarse, swallowed before it crossed the distance. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron, forcing myself to keep moving. A wave of fire slid across the surface just ahead of me, hissing as droplets exploded into steam. I ducked beneath it, holding my breath. The water pressed against my chest like a fist. The noise of the flames was replaced by the low thunder of the current, a steady, ancient heartbeat that drowned every thought except one. Keep going. When I surfaced, the world had changed color. Everything glowed orange and gray. The air smelled of fuel and despair. My helmet was gone, torn away by the current. I didn't care. I reached for another beam and pulled myself closer to the far side. My boots scraped against submerged rubble. I could see the bank now, the broken grass and dirt, the smear of a uniform lying still. He was there. I stumbled onto the mud, dragging myself up by my elbows. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. Every sound echoed strangely, like hearing the world from inside a shell. I crawled the last few feet to him. His eyes flickered open, glazed but searching. When they found me, they stopped moving, as if sight itself had been a promise kept. "You came," he whispered. His lips barely moved. The words carried more by memory than sound. "I told you I would," I said, and the moment I spoke, I realized how small my voice had become, soft like a confession. His leg was twisted beneath him, blood soaking through his trousers. The ground around us steamed, red and black mixing in the dirt. I tried to lift him, but he groaned and pushed weakly against me. "Don't," he said. "You'll drown us both." I shook my head. "We'll make it. There's a crossing still standing downriver." He smiled faintly, a tired, broken smile. "You were never good at lying." Another explosion sounded in the distance. The ground trembled, and a wave of heat rolled over us. I pulled him closer, shielding his body with mine. He coughed, and for a moment his hand clutched my sleeve. His fingers felt impossibly light. "Do you remember the barn near Lille?" he asked. His voice was drifting, as if each word had to climb a hill to reach me. I nodded. "The one with the painted door." He smiled again, barely visible through the soot. "You said if we made it home you'd paint one just like it, red with a black cross, you remember?" "I remember," my voice cracked. "You'll see it when we go back." He exhaled slowly, a sound halfway between a sigh and a release. "If you do, paint it for both of us." "Don't talk like that," I said, but the plea came too late. His hand slipped from my sleeve and fell into the mud. For a moment, the only sound was the river. The flames were quieter now, reduced to low whispers along the current. The smoke began to thin, revealing a pale sky bruised with grey. I held him until the weight of his body settled into stillness. I had crossed for him, but he was already gone. I don't know how long I sat there. Time, like everything else, had burned away. When I finally stood, my legs trembled. I looked across the river, back to the bank I had come from. The others were gone. The field was empty, except for the wind. The fire had eaten most of the bridge. What remained was nothing but blackened ribs poking from the water, the bones of something that once carried men toward hope and now carried only ghosts. I looked down at him one last time. His face was calm now, untouched by the heat or the fear that had chased us both for so long. I brushed the ash from his forehead and whispered his name. It disappeared into the smoke. I wanted to cry, but the war had stolen even that from me. My eyes stayed dry, heavy, useless. I took his dog tags, hesitating before slipping them into my pocket. My fingers closed around the metal, still warm. The retreat orders echoed in my mind, each word a blade twisting slow. I turned back toward the water, staring at the current that had nearly taken me. It looked calmer now, almost beautiful, as if it had finished its work. I told myself I'd follow it downstream, find another crossing, rejoin what was left of the unit. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't leave him yet, not until the river cooled, not until the fire stopped reflecting in his eyes. And so I sat again between flame and water, between duty and heart, between the living and the dead, wondering which side I truly belonged to. Before that morning, before the burning river and the screaming orders, there had been quiet, not peace. War never gives that, but a kind of rhythm you learn to mistake for it. The rhythm of marching boots, of canteens knocking against belts, of men learning to breathe in time with fear so it doesn't sound like panic. That's where I met him, Marek. We were strangers the first day and brothers by the third. It happens fast out there. It has to. You share a trench, a ration, a cigarette, and soon enough your life isn't just your own anymore. The first time I saw him, he was fixing the strap on his rifle with a piece of wire. It was raining hard enough to turn the field to a swamp. He looked up and grinned through the mud streaked across his face. "If this thing falls apart," he said, "I'll just throw it at them." I laughed. The first laugh I'd had in weeks. That was Marek. Even when the world was collapsing, he made it sound like it was just a bad joke we'd survived together. We learned to read each other without speaking. A glance before moving from cover. A nudge when something felt wrong. In war, you don't have time to explain fear. You just pass it between you and hope it reaches in time. One night, near the forest outside Saint-Lô, we found an abandoned farmhouse. The roof was half gone, the windows blown out, but there was still a stove and enough wood to keep warm. It was the first time we'd seen a fire that wasn't trying to kill us. We sat by it for hours. The rain outside turned the world into a blur. Inside, the light painted everything gold. Our faces, our rifles, the walls. Marek pulled a harmonica from his pocket. I didn't even know he had one. He played something soft, something that didn't belong in a place like that. I remember closing my eyes and pretending, just for a minute, that the world outside the door didn't exist. When he stopped, the silence felt too heavy, so I spoke. "When this is over," I said, "what's the first thing you'll do?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "Sleep in a bed that doesn't move. Eat food that doesn't taste like metal. And you?" "I'll go home," I said. "My father had a barn. The door was red, but the paint's probably gone by now. I'll fix it." Marek nodded. "Then paint one for me too, black cross in the middle, so I'll know which is yours when I visit." That promise stuck, not as a dream, but as a thread. Something small to pull ourselves through the mud with. We talked about it often, like a secret only we understood. It made the waiting bearable. Weeks passed. Battles came and went like storms, sudden, violent, then gone, leaving only what they'd broken. We were sent from field to field, from one nameless village to another, always moving, always losing pieces of ourselves in the process. One morning, after a long march through fog, Marek fell behind. He'd been quiet the whole day, slower than usual. I asked what was wrong. He lifted his hand, showing the inside of his glove soaked in blood. "It's nothing," he said, "just a scrape." But it wasn't. A piece of shrapnel had buried itself near his wrist. Infection had already started, dark lines crawling under his skin. We cleaned it as best we could, used what bandages we had. He didn't complain. He never did. That night, while the others slept, I heard him muttering. I leaned closer. He wasn't praying, he was talking to himself, whispering names, maybe family, maybe ghosts. He caught me listening and smiled. "Don't look at me like that. You talk to the fire sometimes too." He was right. We all did. When words failed, when silence grew too heavy, the fire became our only listener. By the time the orders came to move again, Marek could barely hold his rifle. He refused to stay behind, said he'd rather die standing beside me than lying in a tent. I didn't argue. There's no winning against a man who's already chosen his way to die. The next week took us to the river, the one that would later catch fire. We were supposed to hold the far bank while the engineers built a crossing. It was routine, they said, just another day of smoke and waiting. But when the shelling began, nothing felt routine. The earth shook, trees fell, and the sky filled with fire. Marek and I took cover behind a ridge, mud splattering over our helmets. He laughed again, that same careless, fearless laugh, even as the ground trembled beneath us. "If we die here," he said, "make sure the barn door looks good." I wanted to answer, but before I could, the explosion came, a flash, a roar, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. Only the smoke remained. That was the moment everything split. The war outside and the war inside. The orders that told me to retreat and the voice that told me to go back. The voice that still whispers even now. That's how we became brothers, not by blood, not by chance, but by the kind of promise that outlives reason. And that's why, when the river burned, I didn't think. I remembered. I remembered a man in the rain fixing a rifle with wire, smiling through the mud, and telling me he'd see the barn door again. That memory, not duty, not courage, that's what made me go. The order came at dawn, carried by a messenger whose face I barely recognized beneath the grime. His voice was thin and brittle, like it could snap under the weight of what he had to say. We were to hold until midday, then fall back to the western ridge. Reinforcements weren't coming. There was nothing left to hold. When he finished reading, the silence that followed was worse than the shelling. The men didn't argue, didn't even curse. They just stared at the ground, as if by looking down, they could pretend the earth beneath us was still solid, still ours. The air already smelled of gasoline. The engineers had been preparing charges along the bridge all night. I watched them work in the grey light, quiet, efficient, tired beyond emotion. They knew what it meant to destroy your only way home. Marek was sitting a few meters away, his back against a splintered log, one hand pressed to his side where the wound still leaked through the bandage. His skin was pale, lips cracked, eyes fever-bright. He hadn't said much since the explosion that separated us the day before. I found him crawling through a ditch, half-conscious, still clutching his rifle like a lifeline. "How bad is it?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He tried to grin. "Hurts less than your cooking." "You can't even taste my cooking." "Exactly," he said, and that almost smile faded as he winced. "They're blowing the bridge, aren't they?" I hesitated. "It's orders." He turned his head toward the sound of hammers striking metal and the soft hum of wires being laid. "Orders," he repeated. "Funny word. Always sounds clean when they say it." I looked away. The fire in the distance had begun to climb higher, thin lines of smoke stretching into the sky like the ghosts of what we'd built here. By mid-morning, the first shells started falling again. The enemy had found their range. The ground shook, spitting dirt and splinters into the air. Men ran for cover, shouts cutting through the thunder. I grabbed Marek's arm, trying to pull him up. "We have to move." He tried to stand, but his leg buckled. I hooked his arm over my shoulder, half dragging, half carrying him toward the riverbank. Every few steps he stumbled, breath hissing through clenched teeth. We reached the edge of the bridge just as the first span gave way. A thunderous crack split the air, and fire erupted where the charges had been set. The structure groaned like something alive before collapsing into the current. Flames caught the fuel that had spilled from the destroyed trucks, and in seconds the river was alight. The order to retreat came again, louder, sharper this time. The words cut through the smoke, "Fall back, all units, fall back." But I couldn't, not yet. Marek was slipping, his strength gone. We collapsed behind a mound of earth near the shoreline. The air was a furnace. Each breath seared my lungs. The world had become nothing but heat and chaos. "You have to go," he said. His voice was weak but steady. "You can still make it." I shook my head. "Not without you." "You don't understand," he said, grabbing my sleeve. "They'll shoot anyone who disobeys. You'll be branded a deserter." "I don't care." He gave a small laugh that turned into a cough. "You always were terrible at following rules." Another shell landed close, showering us with debris. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I wiped the blood from my cheek and looked at him again. His eyes had lost their brightness, replaced by something softer, not fear, not even pain, but resignation. He pressed something into my hand, his dob tags. The metal was warm from his skin. "If I don't make it," he said, "give these to my sister. Tell her I kept my promise." I tried to give them back, but he closed my fingers around them. "Just in case," he whispered. Then another explosion tore through the air, closer this time. I turned my head, blinded by dust. When I looked back, he was gone, swallowed by the smoke and the heat. Panic hit me like a hammer. I screamed his name, but my voice disappeared in the roar. I stumbled forward, searching, calling again and again until my throat felt raw. Through the smoke, I caught a glimpse, a shadow moving on the far side of the river. I squinted, heart pounding. It was him. He was alive, crawling, dragging himself through the mud toward the ruins of a wall. "Marek!" I shouted. He didn't hear me, or maybe he did and couldn't answer. Then the runner appeared again, face streaked with soot, yelling the same word that had started this all. "Retreat! Fall back now!" He grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away, but I wrenched free. "I can't leave him." "He's gone," the runner shouted. "You'll die out here." Maybe he was right. Maybe that was the point. I turned back toward the burning river. The fire danced on the surface like a living thing, mocking, daring me to try. I could feel the heat on my face, the pulse of the flames matching the beat of my heart. Behind me, the last of our unit was already moving out, shadows swallowed by smoke and distance. I was alone now, alone with the river, the fire, and the sound of his voice echoing faintly across it. That was the moment I made the choice that would follow me for the rest of my life. When duty said go, my heart said stay. The air had changed. It wasn't just hot. It was alive, breathing, moving, roaring. The wind dragged smoke through the trenches, wrapping around me like a living thing. I stood at the edge of the river, the ground trembling under the percussion of artillery, and watched the water twist under sheets of flame. The current was fast, carrying debris and pieces of the bridge we had once marched across with our heads held high. I remembered that morning, the sound of boots echoing on wood, the chatter of men pretending they weren't afraid. Now it was just me, the smell of burning oil, and the echo of a promise I couldn't let die. Marek was still across the river. I could see flashes of movement, his arm dragging against the mud, his helmet glinting when the firelight shifted. I called his name again, but my voice came out hoarse, dry, shredded by smoke. No answer. Just the hiss of burning fuel and the distant crack of rifles. There was no time left to think. Thinking was a luxury for men who still had choices. I dropped my rifle. It clattered against the stones, its sound almost delicate amid the chaos. I tore off my jacket, feeling the heat rise against my sweat-soaked shirt. My heartbeat filled my head like a drum. I stepped forward, my boots sinking into the slick mud at the edge. For a moment, I hesitated, not from fear of dying, that had left me long ago, but from the knowledge that this choice would mark me forever. The moment I moved, I would no longer belong to the army, or the war, or the men retreating behind me. I would belong only to him. The first step into the river stole my breath. The water was ice beneath the heat, a shock so violent I gasped and nearly fell back. The next step took my knees, and the fire's reflection danced on the surface around me. I moved forward, one hand clutching the remains of the bridge to steady myself. Flames floated on the current, carried by ribbons of oil that snapped and hissed like angry spirits. The smell was thick, gasoline, metal, and flesh. I ducked beneath one burning beam, the heat grazing the back of my neck. I came up gasping, my lungs clawing for air, my ears filled with the heartbeat of the river. Halfway across, I lost footing. The current dragged me down, twisting, pulling. For a heartbeat, the world went black, cold swallowing heat, silent swallowing sound. I kicked hard, pushing against the weight of the water, and broke the surface, choking on smoke and ash. I could see the far bank now. It looked impossibly far, like a memory slipping away in a dream. I swam, one arm reaching, the other pulling through the thick, oily current. My body moved on instinct alone, not grace, not strength, just will. The kind of will you don't choose, it chooses you. When I finally reached the shallows, my arms gave out. I dragged myself forward, elbows scraping against rocks slick with soot. The mud sucked at my legs, trying to keep me, but I refused to stop. Then I saw him. Marek was slumped against a broken beam, one leg twisted beneath him. His uniform was torn open, soaked through with blood and river water. His eyes fluttered open as I crawled to him. For a moment he looked confused, as if he thought I was a ghost. "You shouldn't have come," he said, voice raw, almost a whisper. "You'd have done the same," I answered. He smiled faintly. "That's the problem." I slid an arm behind his back and tried to lift him. He gasped, his fingers digging into my shoulder. "Don't. I'm getting you out of here. There's nowhere left to go. Then we'll make somewhere." He laughed, a weak, dry sound that turned into a cough. I pressed a hand over the wound at his side. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. I tore a strip from my sleeve and bound it tight, ignoring the tremor in my hands. Overhead, the sky flickered orange and black. A shell burst nearby, sending up a spray of dirt and sparks. I hunched over him, shielding his body with mine until the dust settled. He was lighter than I remembered, bones and breath, little else. I tried to hoist him up, but he pushed me away. "Leave me," he said. "They'll shoot you if you're caught." "Then they'll shoot us both." He opened his mouth to argue, but another explosion cut him off. The sound rolled across the water, deep and endless. I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. When it faded, I spoke softly, almost to myself. "You once said you'd see my barn door again. You said you'd visit. I'm holding you to that." He blinked slowly. "Stubborn bastard. I learned from you." He gave a weak laugh, but his hand found my arm, gripping it faintly. "Then help me up before I change my mind." I lifted him carefully. He groaned but didn't resist, his arm hooked around my shoulders, his weight pulling at my spine. I half-carried, half-dragged him toward what little cover remained, a cluster of burned crates and twisted metal. Each step was a negotiation with pain. My muscles screamed, my boots slipped in the mud. The river at our backs roared like an audience. I could feel the heat from the flames licking against my face, drying the sweat into salt. When we reached the edge of the tree line, Marek's legs gave out. We collapsed together in the dirt. He was shaking, pale, barely conscious. I pressed my hand against his chest. His heart was still there, faint but steady. He opened his eyes again, glassy and tired. "You shouldn't have come," he said one last time, softer now, almost kind. "I had to." He tried to answer, but no words came. His lips moved once, twice, then stopped. The world held still. Even the fire seemed to quiet. I sat there, my arms still around him, the weight of his body heavy against my chest. For a long time, I didn't breathe. When I finally looked up, the smoke had cleared enough for me to see the far bank. Our bank, empty, silent. The army was gone. The war had moved on without us. But I had made my choice. And somewhere deep inside, I knew it would haunt me for the rest of my life. The world had gone quiet, as if the battle had taken a breath and never exhaled. Smoke hung over the river like a curtain, soft and gray, and beyond it there was only silence, no orders, no gunfire, just the low hiss of dying flames. Marek's body was still warm against me. His head rested on my shoulder, his breath shallow and uneven. I could feel every rise and fall, each one smaller than the last. My own hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion so deep it felt carved into my bones. I tried to lift him again. My legs shook as I got him onto my back. He was dead weight now, the kind that feels heavier because of what you know, not what you carry. His arms slipped limp around my neck, his dog tags clinking softly against mine. The ground was uneven, churned into mud and ash by artillery. Each step was a negotiation with pain. My shoulders burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. I told myself if I kept moving, if I just took one more step, I could still save him. I could still undo what the war had already written. The river glowed behind me, an orange wound stretching into the horizon. I walked until the sound of the water faded, until the trees began to swallow us. The forest was dark and wet, filled with the smell of smoke and pine sap. Birds had fled long ago. The only sound left was the crunch of my boots and the low, rhythmic clatter of metal tags against my chest. I found a small clearing and lowered him to the ground. My knees gave out beside him. For a long time, I just stared at him. The dirt on his face, the streak of blood drying near his temple, the faintest trace of a smile that lingered even now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photograph he always carried. The edges were torn and smudged, but I could still see her. A young woman standing in front of a farmhouse, her hair tied back, her smile small but sure. His sister Anna, the one he'd made me promise to find. I looked back at him. "You'll see her again," I said quietly. "I'll make sure of it." My voice didn't sound like mine. It was thin, empty, too calm, like I was speaking from somewhere far away. His eyes fluttered open once more, barely. He looked at me, not seeing all of me anymore, maybe not even recognizing. But then something flickered. His lips moved, no sound coming at first. I leaned closer, holding my breath to catch whatever he had left. "Don't let it take you," he whispered. I frowned. "What?" "The guilt," he said, each word slower than the last. "Don't let it stay." I wanted to tell him I wouldn't. I wanted to lie to him one last time, but I couldn't. The truth was already written between us. It would stay. It would grow roots in me. His eyes went still before I found the words. The faint tremor in his hand faded. I watched the last bit of life leave his face, and for a moment the air itself seemed to stop moving. I don't remember how long I sat there. I remember only the sound of the fire dying down and the taste of ash on my tongue. I remember reaching for his dog tags and pressing them against my forehead, the metal cooling fast against my skin. I remember the way the world felt smaller, quieter, emptier. When I finally stood, the light was beginning to change. The day was sinking behind the trees, the smoke turning blue in the dim. I dug a grave with my hands, too tired to use my knife, too stubborn to leave him to the open sky. The ground was wet, heavy, but I didn't stop until the hole was deep enough that the earth could take him gently. I laid him down carefully, straightened his uniform, and folded his hands over his chest. I took the photograph and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He'd want it close. I sat there until the darkness thickened, until I could no longer see the lines of his face, only the shape of him beneath the soil. "Rest easy, brother," I said softly. "You kept your promise. I'll keep mine." When I walked away, the forest felt endless. My legs were weak, my throat raw. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew if I did, I'd never be able to leave. By the time I reached the far ridge, the shooting had stopped completely. The front had moved on, leaving behind a graveyard of metal and smoke. The retreating column was gone. I was alone in a war that had no place left for me. I followed the empty road for hours, guided only by the sound of my own footsteps. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, or maybe it was artillery. At that point, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. When the night finally swallowed the sky, I collapsed beside a fallen tree. The cold crept in, numbing my limbs, but I didn't light a fire. I couldn't bear to see it, not after what I'd crossed through. I held his tags in my hand until I fell asleep, the metal pressing into my palm, a reminder that he was gone and I was not. That night, I dreamed of the river. It wasn't burning anymore. It was calm and silent, reflecting a sky full of stars. On the far bank, I saw him standing, whole, clean, smiling the way he had before the war. He raised a hand, as if to wave me over. But I couldn't move. When I woke, the tags were still in my hand, cold as stone. Years have passed since that morning. The war ended, the uniforms disappeared, and the world went back to pretending it had never burned. But for some of us, the smoke never cleared. It stayed, behind the eyes, in the lungs, in the silence between heartbeats. I live far from the front now. A small village, quiet and grey, with more crows than people. I fix fences for neighbours who still believe that wood can keep ghosts out. I walk the same road every evening, past the fields, down to a narrow river that bends through the valley. It isn't the same river, but water has a way of carrying memory no matter where it flows. Sometimes I stand there for hours, watching the current move. I tell myself it's peace, but peace feels a lot like waiting for something that will never return. The locals think I'm just another old soldier with bad dreams. They're not wrong. Every night, when sleep finally takes me, I see him again. Marek, standing on the far bank, smoke drifting between us. I call his name, but the wind always carries it away. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His silence is enough. After the war, I tried to find his sister. I walked for days, following the broken roads through villages half rebuilt, half abandoned. When I finally reached her town, there was nothing left of it but chimneys and wildflowers growing through the stones. No houses, no people, just the smell of time. I left his dog tags hanging on what was left of the church gate. It was the only grave marker I could give her. I remember thinking then how obedience and disobedience are both prisons, one made of rules, the other made of ghosts. They teach you that following orders will save lives, but they never tell you whose. They say courage is doing what must be done, but they never tell you what it costs to live with what you've done after it's over. Sometimes I wonder what the men from my unit remember of that day. They probably tell the story differently. Maybe they don't tell it at all. Maybe to them I'm just a name that was crossed off a roster, one more soldier who went missing when the bridge went up. Maybe that's for the best. I built a barn on a hill a few years ago. The boards are old, uneven, the kind of wood that creaks when the wind moves through it. But the door is red, just like I promised. In the middle, painted over the grain, is a small black cross. It doesn't mark faith, it marks memory. When I open it in the morning, sunlight pours through and lands on the floorboards like gold dust. For a moment, the world feels weightless, untouched by fire or smoke. But by evening, when the light fades, I see the shadows again, the way they bend and flicker, the way they reach for me when the wind howls across the fields. Some nights I sit on the porch and listen to the river below. It whispers the same way it did that day, the sound of water carrying everything away except what truly matters. They said once that time heals all wounds. I used to believe that. Now I know better. Time doesn't heal, it teaches you how to carry the weight. It shows you where to hide it, how to smile with it, how to live with the ache without letting it break you completely. I still hear his last words sometimes. Don't let it take you. I tried, brother. I really did. But the truth is, the guilt never leaves. It just learns to breathe beside you. When I die, I hope someone finds this barn, opens the red door, and hears the wind move through the wood. Maybe they'll see the cross. Maybe they'll wonder who built it. Maybe they'll walk down to the river and see the reflection of the sun on the water, burning just enough to remember. And if they listen closely, if they stand very still, they might hear two voices carried on the wind, one calling from the far bank, and the other answering softly, "I'm still here."